I mean,
Go ahead. So, have you cut the sleeves out yet?
yes,
Uh,
yes.
and you're
And so not out of the actual fabric. So no, no,
well,
not out.
let me kind of draw. Let me get one moment, please.
Okay.
My
Because I look online and they have so many different ways, and I wanted to ask you the
okay.
best way to add ease to the bicep.
Well, I'm gonna draw just like just a basic sleeve, but well, no, actually, I'll draw the sleeve that you're working with. Um, okay, so this is what you're working with.
Right.
Really, how I would do it, and how you determine how much you need. And this is my teacher Simone would just have a fit if she heard me say this, but this I find it works. You
Okay.
cut cut down the middle of your muslin,
Okay.
and it's going to spread open.
Right. Okay.
That's the amount you need. That's what the sleeve wants.
Okay.
You with me? So what you're going to do is, here we are. These are a little larger than Barbie size, but so what you're going to do is you're going to cut from here to there to here to here and to here, leaving
Okay.
it attached at the seam lines. And so what you're going to do is you're going to spread it. Oh, hang on. So when you spread it,
Okay.
does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
That's how I would do it, because the beauty of this is you're not changing the actual stitching line. That remains constant. The cap height is going to drop a little bit, but there's this whole thing, and it's good to kind of understand this. For me, the fit of a sleeve is really one of those holy grail things. The general rule for an armhole with a fixed circumference,
Right.
you can have a high cap and a short bicep. That is appearance, not so much mobility.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could have a low cap and a long bicep, more mobility, not so much appearance. If it's a short cap and a long bicep for a constant armhole circumference, what you're going to have when you put your arm down is you're going to have a bunch of fabric right in here.
Right. Right. Right.
Good example of that is a men's shirt sleeve. The cap height on a men's shirt sleeve is generally 3 to 3.5 inches.
Right. Right.
That
Right.
is so they can get this up. So if you think about it, a guy puts on his jacket, all that stuff kind of hides out inside the jacket. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the thing to understand is to figure out the minimum ease you need for your bicep on your sleeve. You take your shoulder joint measurement. You measure this whole thing tight, right up to the bone
Right.
on the
Right.
shoulder.
Right. Right.
So
Okay.
that I'm going to call that your shoulder measure.
Mm-hmm.
But then you measure the bodice armhole. That is going to be longer. Generally, it's 1.5 to 2 inches longer, depending.
Okay.
It may be more. The general rule is the difference between your shoulder and the armhole measurement on the bodice is the wearing ease. So let's just say it's 2 inches for round numbers.
Okay.
With me so far. So then you take your bicep
Right. Right. Right.
at
Right.
that same 2 inches. That is the minimum sleeve bicep.
You add the same
The
two.
same two, yeah, the same 2 inches. Whatever wearing ease is added at the armhole based on your shoulder measure
Right.
is
Right.
going
Right.
to be what you add to this measurement to get
Okay.
minimum sleeve bicep. It may be longer, but it may not be shorter. That is something you can do. Like if you have a pattern fresh out of an envelope, you can check that and just see, because a lot of times the armholes are not I mean, a lot of times it's not going to match you because they're working on someone who has like little teeny tiny arms, and
Right.
that's not useful. So that it's just good to understand that. Now, the kind of a side thing is because a lot of people think that if you can't get your arm up, you drop the armhole. That is exactly wrong. You
Right.
you aggravate the problem because then you're adding more wearing ease to the armhole. So you need a longer bicep so that you can have lift on your sleeve.
Right.
So, you've probably heard about like Chanel jackets. They fit right up under the arm. And
Right.
it takes a little getting used to, but once you're used to it, it's comfortable because you can get your arm up because it closely mimics the action of the arm in relation to
Right.
the torso.
Right.
Also, if you have a higher underarm, you can have a slimmer sleeve. And if you have a slimmer sleeve, it creates negative space between the arm and the torso, and it makes the figure appear trimmer.
Okay.
Just
Yeah.
that little, yeah, it's an optical illusion, but that's,
Yeah.
if the sleeve is kind of smack up against the body, the eye kind of goes completely across. But if you have some little daylight between the arm and the torso, the body or the eye doesn't travel across quite so much. It's broken up by the
Right.
negative
Right.
space.
Right.
So these are just things that I needed to understand. And part of how I learned how I understood it, I did an article on this for Threads magazine some years ago. And I wanted to call it How Hip Hop Helped Me Fit a Sleeve, but they're like, no, the readers aren't going to understand that. But when the fashion for the crotch down to your knees first started, I was still living in San Francisco. The policeman on the beat said, "We love this because they can never run. They can't jump over a fence. They can't even sit
Right.
on a
Right.
bus." And my friend Linda Maynard said, "You talk to any woman and say pantyhose, and they'll know exactly what you're talking about." Because see,
Right. Right.
never having worn them, I rely on my women friends to tell me these things. And she said that when you're wearing them, that crotch kind of
Right. Right.
south, and you have to go
Create
to the ladies
trampoline effect.
back up. So, it's this is in the industry, this is called the saddle, as is the crotch. It's a similar fitting
Right.
an arm to a bodice is kind of like fitting a trouser.
Mhm.
So I wanted to understand this because and I've said to my students, if you can't get your arms up in this jacket, no one's ever going to wear it a second time. They may wear it the first time, but they won't wear it twice. And then you failed.
Right.
So that, it's kind of a long answer to your question, but it allows me to expound on a topic that I so enjoy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So
All
does
right.
that help? So questions, anyone have questions on that or anything else? You're all so quiet today. Is it because you've been like up working away on your project? Because you see, just before I turned on the
I take
camera,
my sleep.
I was doing my homework for FIT. So I completely understand. Joanna, you look like you have a question.
I do have a question. I have a
Yes.
question about horsehair canvas,
Yeah.
the tailoring canvas stuff. Does it come in different weights? Because the one I've got here on my jacket, I mean, the collar is just so bouncy, it refuses to kind of just sit.
Okay.
I wonder whether the whole thing was just too thick all the way around. And, I mean, the fabric is just a boring, quite a thick cotton, I have to say, but nevertheless, I just thought maybe when I do the velvet one, will I do it with some other kind of interfacing?
There are different grades. There's an Italian canvas that you can see through it practically. That is what I would recommend because you want a little bit of body, but you don't want it to stand up in the corner.
No, mine is really tough.
Oh, that explains it. That is okay. That is what's called hair cloth or horsehair canvas. That is not a tailoring canvas because that's like what, 28 inches wide. And so you cut it on the cross grain. That is the horse's tail.
Well, that would explain a lot then.
Because I was looking at that thinking, that looks like she has horsehair canvas or hair cloth in there.
Yeah.
Yes. What that's for, I use that you see it in like old school tailoring. There's in this area here, we have the collarbone, we have the shoulder joint, and then there's a hollow between them. In bespoke, like old school hard tailoring, they make what's called a shield that is out of this hair cloth, and they run it hair this way, hair this way, hair this way. And what that does is it stiffens this area so that the jacket doesn't fall in between the collarbone and the shoulder joint.
Right.
So
So what should I have asked for? What am I to tell the shop to send me?
Well, the term that is turning into a generic term is Hymo canvas.
Hymo.
Hymo. Hymo. Now, Hymo is a brand, but more and more people are just referring to it as Hymo canvas or Hymo.
Okay.
Because
Well, it's too late for this one because I'm not undoing it.
I don't blame you. Yeah. But that's, but see,
you live and learn.
Yeah, you learn. And that's a good thing. And what you'll find is Hymo canvas is a lot less expensive than what you have in there. So that will be a relief next.
It was very expensive.
Yeah.
It came from London. It was very expensive indeed.
Wow.
I got I ended up getting some extra orders of the Hymo, and I thought I asked you a couple weeks ago, and it is actually heavier than the other canvas that I got at one of the other shops that I'm more used to using, and I think that you are using.
Yeah.
So, but I was able to get the Hymo on Amazon, Joanna. So I don't know whether if you ordered it on Amazon, how long it would take you, but you can get it.
Joe, you have Amazon in the UK.
Yeah, we do. I use it.
Well, I imagine you could probably find it on Amazon.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll check.
Yeah.
I'll check.
But I did say that the Hymo, because I got some black thinking it would be more appropriate for my darker coat, and it is a heavier than the that traditional piece that you had us using.
Yeah. Well, you see, that's the frustrating thing about buying online, because you can't
feel it.
Yeah. Now, I'm glad you mentioned black canvas, because this is one of those things, because people say, because I'm working with some right now, people say, why black canvas? Why don't you just use that for everything? There are times, and some fabrics, if they're in certain lighting conditions, I know this is kind of in the weeds, but how it was illustrated years ago, there was a magazine in the US called Spy Magazine. It was my Friday night date once a month. It was this satirical magazine. It was screamingly funny to read. They had an article one time, and it was all these paparazzi photos of women in black dresses. And the headline was, "Boobs and underwear are in fashion for fall." And it's this weird thing that when you shoot like a picture with a flash, if certain black fabrics just turn transparent. So you had all these gals in these black dresses, and they thought they were decently covered, and well, they weren't. So if you are working with a dark fabric and you're worried that in certain lighting conditions your canvas might read through, that's when you would use a black canvas. It's just one of those little things to know. Okay, I saw another question. Yvonne, did you have a question?
Yes. Do you happen to know if Fashion Sewing Supply carries the Hymo? I bought some hair canvas, but I haven't received it yet.
That I don't know. I haven't been on the site, so I couldn't answer that.
Okay.
So other questions? Because what we're doing today is we're installing the sleeves. Aren't we excited? Okay, so without any further ado, let us begin. Here we are. And as usual, don't be shy about asking questions, because that is your job as students. So let me just get all this sorted out here. And we're off. As usual, I'm showing you first the results of what we're going to be achieving today, so you can really enjoy. We have a beautiful set-in sleeve, complete with shoulder pads and sleeve heads. So to create this wondrous vision, we have plenty of work to do, so let's get busy. So to begin installing the sleeves, we of course have the jacket that we completed in the last step. We also have the sleeves that we completed earlier. We also have the shoulder pads and sleeve heads. Now, we covered the shoulder pads when we were working on fitting the muslin, but the sleeve heads will be something that we're going to get to in a few moments. So now that we have all the pieces here, let's begin. I generally make my own sleeve heads. I find they're very easy to do because usually when you need a sleeve head, it's usually about 3 in the morning and the stores are closed. So this is made out of the same fabric as the jacket. You could use a wool flannel, you could use a cotton flannel. It's very easy to construct, so I'm going to show you how. We start with a bias strip. I'm using the self fabric. It can be a cotton flannel or it can be a wool flannel, but the width is 4 inches and the length is 11 inches. I found this is the optimum dimension for creating these sleeve heads. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to press it in half. And when I press it in half, what I like to do is to have about a 1/2 inch showing here. So next we're going to go over to the sewing machine. We want to sew 1/2 inch from the folded edge. There's the folded edge, 1/2 inch. Now this is a zigzag stitch. The width is 5.0 and the stitch length is 2.0. From here, let me show you the results. So from here, we go back to the pressing table. Our first step is to press right along this zigzag stitch. So this is what it's going to look like. Now this next step is going to look like a magic trick. So we're going to start here and we're going to pull and stretch and press at the same time. So there we have it. I'm going to let that cool. And while it's cooling, I have this one here. So what I like to do is just round off these ends. So that they won't be quite so apparent when you put it in the garment. And so here we have our sleeve heads prepared and ready to install. I have worked ahead and prepared one of the sleeves
for easing into
Kenneth,
armhole.
Yes,
So
pardon
now-
me.
go ahead.
So my friend brought back from Paris all but like 10 yards of this stuff, which she called sleeve head, and I've never used it before.
Okay,
Is this usable in this project?
you could. Yeah, I think it's called cigarette. I know Susan Calgi uses something like that. So yeah,
But how do I? It doesn't look anything like what you.
but okay, I guess because I don't really. Here, let's see if I can get. So let's see. Could you put it up to the camera?
Yeah, it's like lamb's wool on one side, and then a lightweight horsehair canvas strip, bias strip, on the other.
Here. That you could do that, yeah, because it's bias, and so the bias can shape around the yeah. I would fold it kind of like I did on here, and have the canvas out. Well,
Okay,
no,
canvas out.
no, I'm sorry, have the canvas on the inside and the fluffy out.
Okay,
And you could fold it, press it in half, and steam it to shape. That would work. Yeah.
okay,
Okay.
okay, great.
Beautiful.
I'll give it a try. Thanks.
Okay.
I've got a ton of it.
Good. Okay. So other questions?
Yes, I have one. Okay, so if you were gonna use a Linton tweed that's all wool, it seems to me that they're saying that to use a cool iron, and now I have a Namoto
Yeah.
iron,
Mhm.
and it's quite hot. So I'm just wondering, with your steam, can you steam on a cool iron? I mean,
To a certain extent. I know on my iron, and I believe when I had the Naomoto, same thing, is there's a dial that will tell you kind of the lowest temperature that's going
Right.
to get steam. So,
So-
you see, the Linton tweeds, I understand why they say that. What I would say is, test the scrap of the fabric before you
Right.
start pressing. But the Linton tweeds that I have used can stand up to a little more heat than they say.
right, I was surprised because they're all wool.
Yeah.
And
Well,
the
but you
ones
see,
that I'm
now-
using.
I think if it's 100% wool, you're all good. I think they're just doing that to kind of cover themselves, because some of the Linton tweeds have other fibers like cellophane or lurex threads or something like that, which would be harmed by too hot of an iron.
Right, right.
So
Okay,
I think that's why they're doing. They're just heading on. They're just saying about all of them, don't heat these up too much. But if it's wool, you should be fine.
right, right. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So other questions? Okay, then back to the story.
Do here, I'm going to explain first, because there's a big mystery about where do you ease that sleeve cap. So let me just zoom in here. What I look at is where this fold would intersect the stitching line and where this fold would intersect the stitching line. Now, I tend to like a longer ease, so that is the first indication. Then I like to come down about 3/4 of an inch on either side. And so on this particular pattern, the back notches are where you're going to ease. They have a notch up here in the front, but I like a longer distribution. There's also shoulder knots, so you can make sure that this actually hits with the shoulder. So then this is where I like to put my ease. From here, I have threaded up a needle with the Mara 30. And there are different ways of drawing in the sleeve cap, but I found that for something like this, I like the control. So now let me change the camera angle and I will show you what I'm going to do. So here, this is good to see what I've done so you can see where I'm going. So you have two thread tails here, but it's one continuous stitch where we turn right here. This first row of stitching is at 1/2 inch. So you want this inside the stitching line, and then the second row of stitching is midway between the first row of stitching and the cut edge. But the point here is that we sew down to one side and then we sew back, because when you start pulling on these, you don't have to worry about pulling the thread completely out and then having to start over, because that's just a bore. So let us begin. And it doesn't really matter. You can start one on one end or the other. So I'm going to start here. Let me just zoom in a little bit here so you can see. So I'm just eyeballing it at 1/2 inch. You know, if you really want to, you could get a chalk line or, piece of chalk, mark a line. There's no shame in that. Marking is better than not marking, but for this sort of thing, it will be fine. So now and the stitches are 1/4 inch or a little smaller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to sew around to the other end, and I will meet you back here. Okay, we are at the other end. Now we can remove that pin and turn the work this way, because we're going to turn around then. And so the other way, the stitches don't have to match in size or spacing. So you're going roughly between the first row of stitching and the cut edge. Okay, you're almost here. That's not going to be deadly. I'd like it a little longer, but we're going to be pulling on that anyway. So, okay. So, sometimes it tangles. Just part of sewing. Okay, so now let me just draw out a little bit. So here we have begun drawing up the sleeve cap. Our next step is at the pressing table. You can see here that I've worked ahead. Now, the object when we're easing this sleeve cap is you want it so that the seam allowances, when you press it, are going to fold, and all of this compresses in nicely. So from this side, you can see where the stitching line is going to occur, we don't have any kind of puckers. So this is something that takes moisture and steam to create. So this is where we're going. Now, let me bring in the other sleeve here. And our guest appearance of the spritzer bottle. Because this is done with steam and heat. So what I like to do first, turn this outside, turn the inside out, and you're going to spritz the back of the fabric. And with wool, don't be shy. Wool can shape. So then I'm going to grab these two here and pull. Now you don't have to get it all in one go. You can coax it into shape. And so just zoom in a little bit so you can see better. Here we are. So you're just going to start shaping this sleeve cap over the end of the sleeve board. Now this is going to take you a little time. Don't feel like you have to rush it. Because if you don't take the time and you try to rush it, you end up pressing some creases in here, which you don't want to do, because then you have to get them out. It's noon, just so you know. So I'm going to give another little tug. And so what you're essentially doing is ironing this dry. And you can distribute these gathers as you see fit. So when you think you have it, you can actually wait till it cools a little bit and then put it down on the pressing table and check. Because if it isn't completely flat, give it a little more of a tug. And actually, that I think is going to do it. So there is what we're going for. Now, back to the work table, because once we get to the work table, we're going to start installing the sleeve. Now, I've worked ahead, and you can see here, I have done the preemptive grading because you don't want the big wide seam allowance to intersect with that seam. So what that will look like on the sleeve that we just got back from the pressing table is we're going to just narrow these seam allowances to 1/4 of an inch. You know, all of these little things, if you do them as you go, just make your life easier when you need the particular component. So now we have both sleeves. Let's draw this out. We have both sleeves ready to install into the garment. Now, this may just seem like overly paranoid thinking, but since I am dyslexic, I feel I should point this out to you because I have to do it every time I install a sleeve into a jacket. You see how the sleeve curves to the front and that one curves to the front? I lay the jacket down, I lay the sleeves down next to it, so I know that this particular sleeve belongs on this side of the jacket and this one belongs on this side. This is just a little tip. As you can see, I've worked ahead and I have one of the sleeves basted in, so we're going to baste the other sleeve in. So how this works, the first thing you want to do is turn all of this right side out, then, or wrong side out, then you're going to take this up. You want to expose just the armhole of the body itself. You don't want to catch the facing and the lining in that. Now you can see here, I have engaged in preemptive grading. This is what you want. So you don't want a thickness on that seam either. So on this pattern, I start by matching at the underarm notch. So we find the underarm notch of the body, and then we bring in the sleeve underneath. So there we have both of these notches, there they are, pinned together. So we're going to pin and then we're going to baste. So now moving up along the armhole, there is the double notch, and we match that with the double notch on the sleeve and pin. Now, what you might find is that there's a little bit extra here. Don't sweat that. You just ease that in because you stayed the armhole. That is the fixed length that you want this to all install into. So if you stretched it in construction, don't sweat that. And so now, positioned this. I like to position the underarm before I position the cap. I just think it's easier to see. Now I'm going to turn everything a little bit. So now what we're looking for is the front notch. Where is that front notch? Where? There we are. So the front notch goes to the front notch. And pin. And again, as the back, so the front, we're just going to smooth everything around to make sure everything lies flat inside. And we're going to pin. Okay, there we are. So there is the underarm is all now secure from here to here. The next notch we're looking for is the shoulder notch. And there it is right there. So you match shoulder notch on the sleeve with the shoulder seam. And you can pin this way if you wish. And so if you look on the back, the easing is pretty good. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to sort of slide everything into position so that all of those raw edges meet. And pin. Now, while I'm pinning, there's a debate that rages on pinning. Some people say you pin perpendicular, other people say you pin parallel. Both are correct. Debates rage. On exception, I pin perpendicular, but I generally prefer to pin parallel. So we have that part. Now we just want to finish this here. Now you notice, see, we drew it in a little bit too much, which is good. It's better to draw it in too much rather than too little. So you just stretch that out a little bit so that everything distributes nicely, and you pin. After you match up your cut edges together. So now at this point, I'm going to baste, because hand basting, honestly, and again, I like to baste underarm first and then over. So I'm not going to make you watch me baste the whole thing. But generally, I like to hand baste it in place and then try it on. You know, if it's for me or if it's a client, if I've never made the pattern before, I like to try it on and make sure the pitch of the sleeve is correct. And also, I like to try it on just in case I went wrong and I put the right sleeve in the wrong armhole, because I have done that too. So for me, basting is going to make sewing much more enjoyable when we get to the machine. And it also helps me to head off any mistakes. So I'm not going to make you watch me baste this whole thing. I'm going to baste it all around and I will bring you back the results.
So I'm going to stop here and see if there's questions. I see in the chat. Would you use the same hand basting method on fabrics other than wool? Yes, absolutely. And as far as needles, they're what are called milliner's needles. They are longer than other kinds of hand sewing needles. So I use milliner's needles for pretty much everything, but for basting especially, because you can get 2 or 3 stitches in one pass because the needles are long enough. So Other questions?
Did you say Milner's needles?
Milliners, like hat maker needles.
Right.
Yeah, and different, you know, there are different brands. The brand that I prefer is called Millward, Milward. They're from the UK. Last time I bought a bunch of them when I was in London in the late 90s. I just took all of the packages off the peg. I'm still working through those. Okay. Okay.
Okay, coming to the end of the basting. And you notice I'm using black thread because I'm not going to take it out. I'm just going to be honest there. Some people will clutch their pearls at that one, but really honestly, it's inside. You're never going to see it. You don't get extra credit points in heaven if you take your basting out. If you want to, I'd say, great, do it. But honestly, I don't. Now, look at here. As I baste, one thing I like to do on the cap, and you can do this by feel. You just, as you're going along, when you're basting, you want to feel that there are no overlaps or little tucks or puckers as you're basting. That way, you'll know that it will sew in smoothly. Now, let me just turn this right side out to show you the result, because it's already starting to look quite lovely. Now, I'm going to machine sew this now. If you see any of this after we've sewn on the machine, that's easy enough to take out. So we are ready to go to the machine to sew these together. Now, I will confess, I worked ahead and sewed one just to show you what we're going to be doing. I like to stitch the underarm first. So I'm going to start right about here. And you're going to put the cut edge on the 1/2" mark. Now the stitch length is a 2.5 to 3. Sew it sort of, I like to think about it sewing it in sections. I think the underarm first, and then we work up over to the cap. Okay, so the underarm is secure. Now let's head up towards the cap. Now you notice the body is facing up. The sleeve is against the feed. That is as it should be. Because the object here is you want the feed actually to help you ease this cap onto the body. And if you miss the stay tape, don't sweat it. Honestly, it's done its job. Now we're coming up to the shoulder. This is where we can use the canvas as our guide. You can have the stitching be a little bit outside it, but that is the beauty of having the canvas in the front. You know exactly where your seam line is. Okay, we're coming up on the end. Overlap the stitches just a little bit. Yeah, let me take the work out of the machine and show you. Throw this out. There we go. Okay, so there is everything stitched in. And now let me turn it right side out. So looks like a jumble for a moment, but bear with me. Okay, here we are. So see how beautifully that sets in. Part of that goes back to the pattern. You know, I talk about an inch to inch and a quarter cap ease. That really helps all of this sit nicely. So now we're going to go back to the work table to have a nice look at this and go on from there. So here we are back at the table. Let's just admire for a moment. Because we've been working very hard. Okay, we've admired. Now the next step is going to be shoulder pads and sleeve heads. Now this is where we're headed with the shoulder pad and the sleeve head. This is the result that we want to achieve. So I wanted to tantalize you with this. Now I'm going to show you how to achieve it. Our first step is to clip the seam allowances of the armhole on the body itself. We don't have to clip the seam allowances on the sleeve. And these clips are, I'd say probably 3/4 of an inch to an inch apart. I like to start from the shoulder and work down on one side and then go back and clip the other. And if we nick some basting here, no harm, no foul. So one side is done. So then I'm just gonna, there's the shoulder. So the object here is to just clip all of these so that they will spread out, because all of the seam allowances spread into the sleeve. All the seam allowances go this way into the cap of the sleeve. And then underarm, sorry about that. I like to stagger the clips. Because we're going to be treating this later. So we're setting that up for later. Okay, so this is the first step. Now I will get the shoulder pad.
Yes,
And bring it in.
go ahead.
Did you clip into the sleeve and armhole for the underarm and only
Yes.
the sleeve for the cap?
Yes, just from this area here, we stagger the clips on the body and on the sleeve, but above, like about midway up, you just clip through the body seam allowances.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
So other questions? Are we good? Okay, back to the story.
Talk about positioning. Now, if you remember from earlier, that faces the front and that matches at the shoulder seam. So the first thing you want to do is match this at the shoulder seam. You're going to line up your cut edges. See, this is where some people go wrong with shoulder pads. They put the edge of the shoulder pad on the stitching line. That is incorrect. So you're going to line up the cut edges. I like to walk this down to the end first and pin. And you can pin a couple places here if you need to. Then I walk down to the other end. These pins won't be in here for long, so don't sweat it. There's the other end. matched up, and I'll work backwards from there. Okay, so the pad is placed, ready for sewing. Now, for sewing the shoulder pads and the sleeve heads, I like a double thread in working. The reason for this, safety first. If you lose a needle inside your garment, if you find it, if it's your garment, no foul, no harm. But if you're sewing for someone else and they find it, they're going to be extremely upset. So double thread, this is any old thread you can use. So I like to first sew a couple stitches at the end of the shoulder pad here. Now, this is a stab stitch, and the object here when you're stab stitching is you want the needle to come, say, about 1/8 of an inch inside that stitching line and stab it back out. This is not a tight stitch. This is basically a running stitch. It's not a tight running stitch. Keep your tension fairly loose. What you just want to do is hold these edges together. You don't want to cause any kind of rippling because of the stitches, because it will show in the final product if you don't heed my advice for a loose tension. So I'm just going to let you watch me sew this all the way across. Zoom in here a little. There we are. And the stab stitch is better than just a regular running stitch because you want the needle to go in roughly perpendicular to the fabric. And that's how you achieve it, is with the stab stitch. And the stitches are about 1/2 inch long. Don't get your micrometer out for that, but you just, like I said, this just holds everything together. It doesn't, you don't want it to create a wobble. So light tension. And we're heading up towards the other end of the shoulder pad. So again, still about 1/8 of an inch in from the machine stitching line. Almost done. So we've gotten it to here. And just anchor your thread neatly if you can. Of course, it does this when I'm videoing. Okay, so we have the shoulder pad in place. Next, we want to secure the pad to the body. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually turning everything right side out. So what you want to do, you want to make sure that all of the seam allowances face this way, because that's where the shoulder pad is going to be. And so then you just want to make sure that there is no bind along here, because you can feel the shoulder pad in here. And I actually like to pin it a couple of places before I actually flip it back out. And I'm going to show you a little trick, and this is going to save you some heartache, called burying the end of your pins. You pin into the pad, you come back out, and then you pin so that the end of the pin is between the layers. I know this may seem overly finicky, but if you're dealing with a fabric that snags easily and you snag it when you turn this right back outside, because that's what we're going to be doing, you're going to cry. So we have this situated. Now let's turn it back, wrong side out. And so here we have, we have, better. So what we want to do is a catch stitch just to the canvas in front. Now, if this were a lined jacket, I would have a back stay and I would catch stitch the back part to the back stay. But since this is unlined, we just catch to the front. So now I'm just going to anchor the thread. And then this is just a light catch stitch. You catch the canvas, you catch the pad. And this tension is fairly loose. The object here is it keeps the pad itself from curling, because sometimes they do. And then we secure. I'm going to reach around from the other side to remove those pins, because every time you turn it one way or the other, you run the risk of snagging something even though you've been careful. Okay. So we have the pad itself sewn in securely. Our next stop is the sleeve head.
So I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions. Are we good?
Wait. So you're only doing the front.
Yes,
You're
that's
only
correct.
stitching the front. Okay.
Right. Now, if like I said, if I were making this, if I were, excuse me, if I were sewing a fully lined jacket, there would be what's called a back stay. Excuse me. And so then I would tack the back as well.
I see. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Back to the story.
So to begin, to set this up, we want to find the center of the sleeve head, and we also want to find the center of the shoulder pad. It may not correspond with the actual shoulder notch. This one doesn't. So now let me just turn this around. It'll be a little easier to see from this side. So here, there is the, we're looking from the sleeve to the body now. So there is the center of the pad. Here is the center of the sleeve head. So now the object here, I want to pin these together. You're ultimately going to sew the zigzag part to the seam allowance. What this sleeve head does is it pads out the fold right here, giving it a nice appearance, as you saw earlier. So I'm going to work from the center out. And the general rule here is I like the sleeve head about an inch longer than the shoulder pad. Now let me just pin this in place and we can check that. So there's the end of the shoulder pad. There is the end of the sleeve head. Yeah, pretty good, pretty close. And then we're going to work from the center down the other side. A couple more pins and we'll be ready to sew. Okay, so now we have
Yes.
when you are pinning the sleeve head, it looks like it's coming not up to the cut edge.
Yeah,
So
that's quite all right.
okay,
The
okay,
object is you want this fold here to sit right on the stitching line. So you're going to have a little mismatch in this area here.
okay, okay. Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Okay.
The sleeve head.
Oh, pardon me. Pardon
Yeah.
me. What you just
Ready.
said, the fold sitting on the stitching line or the
fold.
zigzag stitch?
Well, the fold zigzag, you know, sometimes the zigzag is a little in front of it. When we sew, you're going to see a little better because see the object here is you want that fold right on the stitching line. Otherwise, if it's a little bit too close to the cut edge of the seam allowance, you're going to get a weird little gap and the sleeve cap won't sit nicely.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Stitching. Now again, I have threaded up a needle with a double thread. I'm using a blue this time because it might be a little easier to see what I'm doing here. So we start at the end here, and you're not going to see this from the outside. So the blue thread is not going to kill you. So I like to just stitch a couple of times just to anchor it. So then the object here, when we're sewing, I'm just going to take the stitch and then turn this back. You want it to catch. So you don't want to see any of this. If you roll this back, you don't want to see your machine stitching. You just want to see a fold. And this is the common mistake people make when they put in a sleeve head is they don't check and make sure that it sits directly on the fold. Back this off for just a moment. That's supposed to go that way. There we are. Okay. And what happens if you have a gap between where the fold of the sleeve head is and the stitching line, you're going to get a little dimple. So you can see, you can't see, except maybe down here a little bit. You don't want to see the machine stitching that sewed the sleeve into place. You're not catching through all the layers. You're just catching through the seam allowance. And so in the final garment, you won't see this. And again, loose tension. Don't sew it too tightly because you don't want to create a ripple. So let me see. Let's just go back. That's what you want. You want that just right up against that stitching line. So I'm going to sew all the way across and bring you back the results. Okay, so head it up on the end. And secure the thread. So then let's survey what we have just accomplished. So if you turn this over, you may see a hint here and there. Not going to kill you, but you want it right up next to. Now, I'm going to draw out a little bit. I'm going to flip this right side out. Now, isn't that beautiful? Now, you probably have noticed that I have not touched this armhole with the iron. That is next, so I will meet you at the pressing table. So here we are at the pressing table, as you can see. So now this is where you want to, what I'm just going to do is steam and press. This is where you want your pressing mitt because this can get pretty hot if you don't. So what that looks like, just zoom in a little bit. You start down here. Let's work the front first. So we're pressing all of the seam allowances into the sleeve. That's as it should be. And we just work all the way over. This is where you value an amazing iron. And honestly, I don't get any advertising from Reliable for this, but they are amazing irons. Okay, so rid of the mitt and have a look at this thing of beauty. Is that not beautiful? So let's go back to the work table and admire what we've just accomplished. I've decided to put it on a hanger because I just think it shows much better on the hanger. Because now we have the shoulder pads in, we have the sleeve heads in, and really most of the heavy lifting is done. Our next stop is finishing.
Okay. Where are you all? There we are. Questions?
That was lovely. That was lovely.
You know, I do love putting in a sleeve, but you know, like I said in the video, it kind of goes back to the pattern. The cap ease for a sleeve, in my opinion, 1 inch to 1.25 inch, 1.5 if you've got a really, really spongy fabric like a linen tweed, but the 1 to 1.25 inch produces just the right amount of roll and it makes the sleeve go in easily. I know I've seen patterns. I was looking at a Vogue pattern one time and they had 2 inches of cap ease. And I was like, no, that's called a padded shoulder or a puff sleeve. So that's the number that I find works really well. Okay, so questions. You all have that kind of stunned look, like I don't know where to begin. You begin by just putting your sleeves in. I know that sounds like an oversimplification, but
Yeah, I, for one, am thankful that we've got these videos and that we will have them indefinitely. They're just fabulous.
well, you see, I just think that's fair because most people can't, well, not can't, but you know, life gets in the way. I mean, I'm running into this myself because I keep thinking about that June 1st deadline and thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get it done? And so when you have something like that, things like this kind of get put on the back burner. So yeah, you know, I think that is kind of crummy that, you know, okay, you have it for just so long. You know, I mean, everyone has to make their business decisions, but for me, it's just, I just think it's better that you, because see, I know you're not going to pass the videos around to people. So, you know, that's because you paid for it, you know, they should too. So, you know, that said, you know, it's there and, you know, for you to use.
I have a question about the cap ease.
Yes.
Is that ease applicable to most jackets or just to a tailored jacket?
Well, you know, well, if you're talking about, because there's like shirts and say casual jackets like a jean jacket, and then there's tailored garments. Shirts, the minimum cap ease I like is 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 inch if the fabric is a little more spongy. But for a tailored garment, especially if you're going to be putting a shoulder pad in, the 1 inch to 1.25 inch is a really good number to just hang your hat on.
So if you're doing a casual jacket, like a, you know, a French chore jacket or something like that, would you need that kind of ease?
You know, I would go with the 1 inch because, you know, and see, Susan could answer in her way because I have not made as many of those jackets as she has. She's done this for, I mean, that's what she was trained in the couture house. I still like to have a little bit of lift. But my understanding of the construction on those jackets is that this seam here presses open. So the seam allowance functions somewhat as a shoulder pad. So I think probably there would be the 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch cap ease for the sleeve in that situation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And like I said, Susan would be the definitive person to ask on that, because yeah, I've made a couple of them. I think they're a lot of fun to make. But I would never presume to say that I know everything about those jackets. Okay, other questions? So Nia, you missed Lola. Check out her.
Yeah, she is pretty.
This is
The
showgirl.
showgirl.
This is for the book, and I'm trying not to think of the June 1st deadline. Now, in the contract, there is a 20-day grace period, but I certainly don't want to do that if I don't have to. So, but yeah. So I was telling my students about this, because I tell them, if you know your craft, you will always have work. Sometimes it isn't work you talk about, like the fox fur hat for the Chihuahua. Yes, I did it. The 5 bridesmaids dresses in 7 hours. That was a friend of mine. And see, this is something, I am not a procrastinator. I like to get as much done up front as possible. And even before, because we had our official meeting on Tuesday, which is like, really? I've been kind of organizing, and I have chapter 1 written. Of course, my question is, okay, do we need an art director so they can tell me what the photos need to look like? I'm working on chapter 2. I'm trying to get this far ahead as I can, because I don't like that last minute scramble. This friend of mine, no, she likes the adrenaline rush of a last minute scramble, which I don't understand. She had started cutting out these 5 bridesmaids dresses the Saturday before the wedding. The wedding was the following Saturday. Now, doesn't that make your blood run cold? I know. And she had appendicitis. She had to have her appendix out. So I got this frantic phone call on Monday saying, I'm in big trouble. And I said, well, I can get there Wednesday. I'll see what I can do. So I got there and I cut out and sewed, ready for hems, 5 fully lined bridesmaids dresses between 10:30 in the morning and 7:30 in the evening. Now, I said to her, if you breathe a word to anybody about me making these dresses, they will find you murdered in your bed. I don't want my name anywhere near these, because I use fusible interfacing. I bagged the sleeves and sewed the sleeve and the lining into the arm. I mean, they look great from the outside. Inside, they were 20 miles of rough road. So, I tell them these stories. I said, you do these things, you cash the check, you just don't say anything to people. And then there's something like this book that they're giving me this just gigantic chunk of money to pull this thing out of my butt by June 1st. And I said, okay. And I said, kids, this is something I do for free. And I was doing it for free during the COVID. And actually, what's kind of fun about this is that a lot of those photos, the whole Bella story, I can use those. That's like money in the bank. I don't have to go back and recreate that. So, yeah, so I'm getting paid to do something I would do for free, it's the way, I wish this for everybody. I just think it's better. Life is better when you get to do things like that. Okay, so other questions? Well, then I believe our... Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to remind, the raglan coat has a backstay and sits fulling line. So if you wanted to apply these techniques that you mentioned for the sleeves, we can use that as a reference if you are doing that coat.
Well, now the raglan coat, generally you just have the shoulder pads in.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's no backstay on the raglan. What we did in the last class, I did you get the video on that? Because
yes.
So we tacked the raglan, the raglan shoulder pad is tacked it's on this seam and here, and then there are thread chains here and in the back, kind of keep it in the general vicinity. And then the lining goes in and hides all of that. So it's a little different way of approaching it.
Okay.
If you
I,
were,
I thought I had a class of yours that had the backstay. Maybe it was the fly front coat or.
yeah, I think that's the fly front coat. Yeah, I
Yeah.
believe so. Yeah. So yeah, because there's a lot of crossover. You know, my tailoring techniques, you know, there are different kinds of things I do, but there are certain things that are constant. And the cap ease on the sleeve, how I put in the shoulder pad, how I put in the sleeve head, it kind of travels across all the different styles of jacket that I make. Okay. Okay.
Excellent.
So other questions?
Would the fly front coat be a next option for us to go while you're busy with your book? If we needed a project between now and then,
I think that I see now the challenge on that, the pattern does not exist anymore. But what I tried to do in that class was I tried to make the pattern making generic enough so that if you found a coat that looked something like this, it would still work. You know, they really insisted that, okay, we have to use an existing pattern. And see, this is why in the raglan coat class, I just used, we have our own patterns. So I don't have to worry about that going out of print. But yeah, it's sort of a variation of this. You're going to see some similarities between this class and that one. The fun part is the fly front. I love sewing a fly front coat. I haven't done one in a while because, you know, I don't need any because I've made, you know, 5 or 6 of them. But that would be a good project. So the next class next time I'm going to be running classes is good safe bet after June 1st. When I get this manuscript handed over, then I'm going to look at the peplum jacket class, you know, the article I did for Threads, because I show two jackets. I call it a tale of two jackets. One is the peplum that I did for the article in Threads, but then the other jacket is just a plain body, but I used the 2-part tailored sleeve and used the same drafting principle to create this really wonderful cuff detail. So for those people who may not like a peplum jacket for whatever reason, you can take the same idea and make a really wonderful cuff on a sleeve, and it makes a really great detail on an otherwise very sober silhouette. So that's going to be the next one I'll be running, and you know, I have you all on my mailing list, and also I'll be, you know, I'll be advertising it on Instagram too. So
what edition of Threads was that in?
oh gosh, let's see. This one.
What month?
Winter 2022. So yeah, so this is where it started. And let's see. Oh, here we are. So yeah, this is the jacket. So we're gonna do this jacket. I mean, I made another one for the video because I didn't do a how-to when I made this jacket. But then I'm going to use that, you know, all of this information and adapt it to drafting a cuff for a sleeve. So that's going to be the next class. So you don't have to be the kind of gal who likes a peplum jacket to actually use the idea in another way on the garment. Okay, so I think our work is done. I'm going to turn the recording off and I'm going to